Welcome to Casual Friday. Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is my weekly Casual Friday podcast. In this week's podcast, I have tidbits. I have a tour through the third volume of WELDON'S Practical Needlework, and I have a demonstration of the vintage Norwegian sock that I reverse engineered, plus a pattern. So let's get started. This tidbit came to me from Bernadette on Ravelry. It's an episode of a BBC radio program called All in the Mind. In this episode, the host, Claudia Hammond, explores the oft-repeated claim that needle crafts like knitting and crocheting improve mental health and can even help prevent cognitive decline. In the half-hour program, she talks to a woman that set up Yarn for Mental Health courses in Northern Ireland last year as a response to the anxiety the COVID-19 lockdowns had caused for so many people. She talks to Esther Rudder, who wrote This Golden Fleece, about the use of crafting as a mental health treatment in institutions where previously patients were just locked up with nothing to do. And she talks to the CEO of Fine Cellwork, a charity organization that teaches prisoners embroidery, needlepoint, and quilting. She also talks to a neuroscientist about whether there is any hard evidence that crafting does have mental health benefits. So the gist of the program is that some people absolutely gain benefits from crafting. It allows them to focus on the thing that they are making and to give them a break from the emotions they are struggling with. Like everything in life, there's no one solution that's going to work for everyone. There was a point in the program where Esther Rudder mentioned that Virginia Woolf was an avid knitter and that she often knit for her mental health, but that it didn't prevent her from killing herself. I did want to mention a couple of things. Esther Rutt's book, This Golden Fleece, is one that I covered in a Tidbits or Casual Friday segment at some point in the past couple of years, at least when it first was published. It's a book she wrote in the year after she quit a university job that was giving her just no joy at all. And she traveled around the UK exploring textile traditions and history and knitting items representative of those places that she visited. Another was that in this BBC program, Esther mentioned a painting of Virginia Woolf that her sister had made showing Virginia sitting in a chair knitting. It's a portrait that's in the National Portrait Gallery, and I love sharing art that depicts knitting, but I can't show you this painting here for licensing reasons, but I will leave a link down to the portrait down in the show notes below. This tidbit came to me from Jen on Ravelry. It's a link to an animated short film called The Last Knit. It's about a woman who is an obsessive knitter. So Jen sent me this link hoping that I would find it amusing, and I did. But like most art, there are multiple layers to this film. It seems like a pretty good metaphor for addiction. And I'm not saying that addiction is amusing or that knitters are addicts, and neither is the film. It's just a pretty good metaphor the way that it's presented. The knitter is sitting isolated near the edge of a cliff, and as she continues to knit obsessively, her knitting grows and begins to pull her closer and closer to the edge of the cliff. I'll leave a link to that film down below if it's something that you would like to see in terms of. This tidbit came to me from Ria via email. It's a link to a collection of 5 articles from Piecework magazine. So like other magazines, Piecework is a subscription-based publication, but they've collected 5 articles for the winter season that they're providing free, calling it an all-access guide to a winter expedition. And then they go on to say that in this collection, we've gathered 5 noteworthy excerpts from the Piecework archive that explore this month's winter theme. These include The Unlikely Tale of Edith Jackie Ron and how she came to be the first lady of Antarctica, how a balaclava helped Sir Douglas Mawson explore our southernmost continent, A stop at Jokkmokk Winter Market, the largest and oldest continuously held winter festival north of the Arctic Circle, plus 2 mitten patterns to download, one based on a pair of Sami mittens and the other on carriage mittens. This tidbit is from Carrie Cat on Ravelry. As she says in her note, I wanted to share this recently launched website from the Department of Animal and Food Sciences at Oklahoma State University. The site has links to educational information about breeds of livestock throughout the world, including a long list of sheep breeds. So when you click on a specific type of livestock, like say sheep, you'll get some interesting general facts, like sheep were among the first animals domesticated, and an archaeological site in Iran produced a statuette of a wooled sheep, which suggests that selection for woolly sheep had begun to occur over 6,000 years ago. The common features of today's sheep were already appearing in Mesopotamian and Babylonian art and books by 3000 BC. So just to clarify, for those of you who may not be aware, there are woolly sheep, which have to be sheared, and hair sheep, which shed. And woolly sheep are the product of domestication. So back to the description. Another indication of the early domestication is the fact that they are the only species of livestock unable to return to a feral or wild state. Selection for wool type, flocking instinct, and other economically important traits over the centuries has resulted in more than 200 distinct breeds of sheep occurring worldwide. Modern breeding schemes have also resulted in an increasing number of composite or synthetic breeds, which are the result of crossing 2 or more established breeds. Now, they aren't kidding about the 200 breeds. I have never seen a list of sheep breeds that was that long. I was surprised at how many that I'd never even heard of. So check out this one. It's a Ratka, or Hungarian Zakel sheep. Those spiral horns are just the most amazing thing I've seen. This tidbit came to me from ISIS2 on Ravelry. It's a link to a YouTube video about Navajo Churro sheep. The channel is called Jillian Eve. She's a spinner, knitter, and weaver. And in this video, she interviews a mother and daughter who raised Navajo Churro sheep. So this is a rare breed sheep that is considered threatened by the Livestock Conservancy. It's a dual coat sheep, and it's really adaptable to the climate changes seen in the mountains of the Southwest. So I'll leave a link down below to that video. This last tidbit came to me from Garter Stitch Guy on Ravelry. It's a link to an online exhibition of Norwegian knitting history in 3 parts. So the first part is called Luxury to Everyday Use and explains that the first knitting brought to Norway were fine gauge luxury silk items, similar to the silk shirt Charles I wore at his execution. Knitting as an activity started first amongst wealthy urbanites as a leisure activity and then gradually moved out to the rural areas. I found that really interesting that is what went on in Norway. The second part of the exhibition is called Practicality to Pleasure, and it talks about how knitting in Norway really evolved in the 20th century. And then the third part is called From Tradition to Copyright and talks about the influence of Un Soland Dale in bringing traditional Norwegian designs to fashion houses. I apologize to her for slaughtering her name. I will leave a link down in the show notes to this online exhibition. A few weeks back, I received a 12-volume set of facsimile copies of Weldon's Practical Needlework, which first began publishing in 1886. Each volume represents 1 year. So far, I've shown you guys the knitting patterns in the first 2 volumes, and this week I've got volume 3, which was published in 1888. So let's go to the overhead and I'll give you a little peek at that volume. So this is volume 3 of the facsimile edition of Weldon's Practical Needlework. So volume 3 was published in 1888. So They always have an index in this annual volume that shows you what was published in each of the months. They have the 7th, 8th, and 9th series of knitting. So there were, I think, 4 knitting series in volume 1, and there must have been another couple in volume 2. So we've got 3 here. We've got a new topic, a new craft called crochet macrame, which is different than macrame lace that they had before. They've got netting, smocking, patchwork, and decorative needlework. They also have some ads in here about all of the different other types of publications that they offer up. So this is a young lady's petticoat. So there's a lot of underwear in these volumes. Underwear, and there's like there's a shawl, a pattern, a couple of patterns for shawls. This is a man's undershirt, a vest, meaning an under vest for a child. They have this pattern called a Ridgeway stitch, and I read through this. It appears in a couple of different places. That's just mistake rib. We've got more underwear here. Some interesting things with little loopy things. A melon-shaped ball. Child's overall cover for a tennis ball. I don't know why you would need that. Little socks and boots for babies and undervests. A baby's pilch, which I learned this from some 1940s books from the UK, and that's just diaper covers. Petticoat, underwear types of things, quilt squares, more things for babies. A jersey vest, another gaiter. These are kind of like leg warmers that extend over the top of the foot, and a lot of times they have a strap underneath them, so it keeps it attached to the foot. Stockings, fancy knit sock. A cycling cap. This is kind of interesting. This is actually garter stitch, knit sideways with short rows. So you're knitting across all of the stitches, and then one shorter each time, and then one longer each time. And it kind of creates these wedges, but it's knit sideways. And then we've got more things for babies, a quilt pattern, another child's petticoat. Now this is the thing that I thought was interesting. It's a binder belt for a young child. So when I've looked these up before, when I've come across them, trying to figure out what they were, there isn't anything very specific that you can really nail down what they were for. And I think part of that is that they were used for different things over time, and there's speculation about what they were for. One is that if you kept this wrapped around a baby's abdomen, it would prevent them from getting colic. So the idea was that it would be snug somehow. Some people speculate that it was like corset training for babies or small children. It's not really clear. So it could be any number of things. Certainly during this time period, if you were knitting comforts for soldiers, you would be, one of the things on the list would be belts, knitted belts, and another term for those are cholera belts. So the idea was you would keep your abdomen warm, and that would prevent you from getting cholera, which of course doesn't actually work. So there could be any number of reasons why they might have wanted to use that. So here you have a baby's whip and rattle. So it's something I guess the baby could whip around, not meant to whip the baby. More petticoats and undervests. A doily. I always think it's interesting how they spell doily then, D''OYLEY, which is not how we spell it today, at least not here in the US. And then it ends with a couple of different hats, infant's toque and a cricketing cap. So for those of you who have been waiting for this, I have written up the instructions for this reverse engineered Norwegian sock. The original sock was one knit by a Norwegian woman named Dagrun Skarsmoen, probably 30 years ago. Dagrun was born in Trøndelag, Norway in 1921, where she lived her entire life until her death in 2012. And I came to the original sock through her relative, Jana, who lives here in Minneapolis. Dagrun had taught Jana to knit while Jana was studying abroad for a year in Norway, and she even taught Jana how to knit these kinds of socks. And the problem was that Jana could no longer remember how to work the heel. It's a very unusual heel that you do not see much in contemporary sock knitting, and she couldn't find a source that could help her figure out how to do it. So a mutual friend of ours put her in contact with me to see if I could solve the puzzle. And I found it so intriguing that I decided this would be the first sock in my new long-term project. So I finished up a 4-year project to knit a sweater from each decade from the 1890s to the 1990s back in September, I think late September. So I had been ready for a new challenge, and I decided that knitting socks and stockings from different eras would be what I would focus on. And this sock fell into my lap at just the right time, and it seemed like a perfect place to start this project. So after I posted my Casual Friday videos, I think late November, early December, on solving the mystery of these socks, a number of you guys were interested in knitting these socks as well. So I promised I would write up the pattern. So there were also some people who suggested that I do a separate Technique Tuesday video demonstrating the really unusual technique used for the heel, rather than having to refer back to it buried within a Casual Friday podcast. And a number of viewers who were interested in these socks had never knit socks before and thought that since the sock is knit with a thicker yarn weight, it might be a good way to break into sock knitting. So here's what I'm going to do. Today, there will be a link to a really bare bones basic PDF on my Google Drive that includes instructions for knitting this sock. It is not formatted all pretty, and there are no photos or extra tips or anything like that in this bare bones pattern. So if you're dying to have this pattern and you can deal with basic information, you are welcome to it through that link that I will put down below. Now, I did film an overhead segment that goes through the entire sock knitting process. So this is the second of a pair. So this is the second pair of socks I knit. So the first pair was spent figuring out all of the techniques that Dagrun had used in her sock, because I didn't get it completely worked out in the first sock. So then once I got it figured out, I wanted to knit a second pair of socks with a longer foot to see how well these socks really did as a sort of one size fits most sock, which is what I think it's intended to be. So my brother has a much larger circumference leg and foot, and I just wanted to knit something that was the right length for him and then see how it fit for the circumference. So I did record my process of each section of the sock, and I talked about what Dagrun did particular in that given section, and then maybe what your options could be for doing something slightly different, like where you might want to vary things and when you might want to do things that are as they're written. So I've got the bare bones pattern that I will link to down below. Next Tuesday would normally be a week off from posting Technique Tuesday videos. And the week after that, I'll be posting the final video in my series on hat crown decreases. So in my normal schedule, it would be another month before I would have an opening in my Technique Tuesday schedule to post a video on the heel technique. So what I'm planning to do is to just squeeze the heel technique video into this coming week's schedule, just kind of do an extra one so that it's there. And then once it's uploaded, I can put the URL for the video in the official pattern PDF. And by that point, that will be formatted pretty, and I'll have photos, and I can do all of that. And then there's the whole process for uploading a pattern to Ravelry that takes a while. So it's probably going to be toward the end of next week when everything is done. So it's not really the most ideal sequence of things, but it's really the best I could do so that I could get all of this done and off my plate and then move on to the next stocking project in the larger long-term project. I will create a discussion thread in my Ravelry group for this sock. So for any of those who would like companionship while you're knitting the sock, you can go look in that discussion group. Just to set your expectations, I'm not running a knit along with this sock pattern because that would be a very time-consuming proposition. But you guys are welcome to knit along with each other and share in that camaraderie if that is something that you would enjoy doing. But I am not offering suggestions for modifying this sock for a custom fit other than, you know, how to adjust it for length. It's just not that kind of a sock. If you are interested in learning to customize socks for a really great fit, that's what my August sock knit along tutorial is about. So I'll leave links down below to the pattern, and depending on when it is that you click on that link, it'll either be the bare bones pattern or it will be the fully formatted pattern with photos and tips and links to all the pertinent technique videos. I will also leave links to the 2 Casual Friday episodes, where I was first explaining this sock and figuring out how that heel was worked, and a link to the Ravelry discussion thread for those of you knitting the sock. Let's go to the overhead and you can watch the whole progress of how this sock is knit. To get started on this sock, you're going to cast on the 48 stitches, and you're going to join in the round, and you're going to work in knit 2, purl 2 ribbing until the leg is about 6 inches in length. The original sock had a row gauge of 7 rounds per inch, and she worked that leg for 44 rounds, so it's just over 6 inches. You can make it longer or shorter, however you like. Once you get your 6 inches or 44 rounds, whatever it is you want for the leg, then you're going to switch to working for the heel. Now, in most heel flap constructions, most heel constructions period, the standard formula is to work the heel across half of the stitches that you have in the round. We have 48 stitches, so that would mean 24, but in this case, this heel is worked for 26 stitches. So I'm going to start here at this knit 2. I'm going to go all the way across these 24 stitches, and then I'm going to work these 2 knit stitches, and then those will be the 26 stitches that I will have for the heel. The original sock was worked in the traditional method, which was that the heel was begun by working across half of the heel, so 13 stitches, then turning, purling back across those 13 stitches, and then purling these 13 stitches over here, so that you are using the first and last quarter of the round for the heel, and that places the beginning of the round at the back of the heel, at the back of the leg. This was done traditionally for stockings because there was actually a seam line here. If the stockings were knit flat, like on a stocking frame, there would actually be a seam here. But if they were knit in the round, there would be calf shaping because the stocking would be going up to at least the knee, if not longer, and it would need to be shaped on the way down. You can see from this stocking, which was knit in the 1860s, that this has a seam line coming down. Now this is a seam line that is 2 stitches wide, not 1 stitch. 1 stitch is more common, but this particular knitter really enjoyed using 2 stitches, and she used garter stitch, so it makes it easy to count the rounds 2 at a time by counting the ridges. Oftentimes it was simply a purl column, but that is how you would keep track of where the beginning of the round is and where you are placing your shaping as you are going down the leg. Even though we don't need to do calf shaping unless we're doing knee socks, but if we're doing a regular mid calf sock these days, we don't need to do shaping, so we don't need to do this seam line. But sometimes it is beneficial to place that beginning of the round at the back of the leg if you're doing something like stripes like we have here, so that there will be a little jog, or a texture pattern where there might be a jog in the pattern at that transition from end of the round to beginning of the round. But if you're working in stockinette or in ribbing, which isn't going to show that jog, or even other stitch patterns can maintain continuity across that transition, you don't need to center the beginning of the round up the back of the leg. You can choose to do that if you want. You'll have a slightly more symmetry if you work your 26 stitches starting from the beginning of the round, because if you are doing the 13 stitches on either side, your 13th stitch is going to be after a knit 1 stitch, and the 13th over here is going to have a purl stitch. So your instep stitches that are going to continue in the ribbing pattern are going to be slightly off center, probably not noticeable when it's on somebody's foot and even inside a boot or slipper or shoe, or just very far away from anybody's line of vision. But I'm going to knit mine across the first 26 stitches of the round. And so I'm going to knit back and forth for 12 rows, and then I'm going to do the shaping for the heel. If you are starting here, if you're going to be doing 13 stitches the traditional way and then 13 back this way, you will have 12 rows altogether on the left side of the heel, but you'll have only 11 rows on the right half. So if you're counting rows and trying to keep track of where you are, you're going to notice that little 1 row discrepancy. When you work the heel, you're going to be working it, as I said, over 26 stitches in stockinette. You are not going to slip your selvage stitches. You are going to keep every stitch in stockinette. Again, do not slip your selvage stitches. I'm going to do 12 rows in stockinette, and then we're going to do the decreased rows. So I have my 12 rows of stockinette, and now what I'm going to do is mark the center point of the heel. So I'm going to place a marker here between after the 13th stitch. We're going to work across until we're 3 stitches from the marker, and then we're going to work a decrease. And then we're going to work that stitch next to the marker, slip it, knit that stitch, and then we're going to work those 2 stitches together. Now, the way that the original sock was knit is that both of these were worked as a knit 2 together. So both of those increases are going to go in this direction, and we're going to be doing 2 more in subsequent rows. So for those of you who are used to doing mirrored decreases, this is going to seem strange, but this was really done quite often, especially in sock heels in traditional knitting, because it's just faster. Nobody is going to be seeing the sock heel. It gets the job done in that it is reducing the number of stitches in a specific location, and so it doesn't matter. But if it matters to you, then you can do those shaped decreases. So let me show you the difference. So you can see right here I have those 2 columns of knit stitches in the middle. The marker would have been right here. And over here I have a decrease. I've got 2 columns of stitches and they merge into one. It's a right leaning decrease. I work a plain round and then another to the right, and then a third to the right. And over here, the decreases are pointed toward those center stitches. So there are sock patterns that use this heel shaping that do call for shaping mirroring the decreases. And the way that they mirror them is that these are worked as an SSK, a left leaning decrease, or an SKP. And then the ones on the second half are worked as a knit 2 together. So that's how I knit the first sock of this pair. So if you can see, this is leaning to the left and this is leaning to the left. This one is leaning to the right and this one is leaning to the right. So you see that column of 2 stitches in the center, and then you've got decreases that are pointing toward it. So I've got 3 stitches left to the marker, and I'm going to do an SSK. You can do an SKP. You can slip one as if to knit, then you can knit this second one, and then you can pass this one over just like you would for a bind off. You can do that, and that creates a left leaning decrease. Or you can work an SSK. So you would slip 2 stitches one at a time as if to knit, and then stick your left needle in the front. And so now you are working those 2 together, and they also produce a left leaning decrease. Either way, is fine. Dagrun worked knit 2 together for both of them. So I've knit my stitch after the marker, and now I'm going to do my knit 2 together, and I am going to knit to the end. So I'm going to purl across, and then I'm going to do this right side decrease twice more. So when I finish the 3rd decrease row, so this is my first one, I'm going to purl across, do a 2nd decrease, purl across, do 3rd decrease, and then I'm going to stop. Okay, so I've done my decreases. I've got my 3 decrease rows done. I've just finished the last one. The yarn is over here on this side. Now I'm going to turn the work, and this is when I'm going to work the heel join. So I'm going to work halfway across. I'm just going to work until I get to the marker. I'm going to purl across. I'm going to take the marker off. And from this point on, the purl side is going to face me the entire time, and I'm going to be working stitches as if to knit, but really knit 2 together through the back loops. So what I'm going to be doing is binding off from the left needle and the right needle. So I'm going to alternate between binding off one from this needle and then binding off from that needle. And the bind off technique that I'll be using is the method of knitting 2 stitches together through the back and then returning that stitch back to the left needle. If I was only going to be binding these stitches off, then after I returned it, I would then work the 2 stitches through the back of the loop, return it, work through the back, return it. But because we're alternating, I'm going to work knit through a 2 through the back loop, return it, and then I'm going to work that backwards on this needle. So this needle I'll be binding off in the normal order, and on this needle I'll be binding off backwards. So you go through the backs of the first 2 stitches on the left hand needle, tighten it up, return it to the left hand needle, and now you're going to work through the back of these stitches. This becomes the working needle. So you're going to go through the backs of both of those stitches. This yarn is going to go around like between the 2 stitches and around to the back. So it's going, if you're looking at it from this direction, it's going around counterclockwise. So if you're a continental knitter, then you can hold this yarn with some tension to the left. And what you have to do is pull this loop through those 2 stitches, and I think it's easier for me. First of all, I'm going to keep my finger on here to keep this from staying in place. And I'm actually going to lift these 2 stitches over and off the needle. And then that stitch gets pulled through. So I pull that needle out, and now I need to return it back to its needle and give it a little bit of a tug just to snug up the yarn. And now repeat that. On the left hand needle, I knit 2 together, pull the yarn through, return it to the left needle, snug it up a little bit. Now the left needle becomes the working needle. It's going to go through the backs of those 2 stitches, and it's always more awkward because if you're not used to doing it this way, and then the yarn comes between the 2 needles and around the back, so it's going counterclockwise. And again, I'm going to hold that against the needle just to anchor it while I pull these 2 stitches over and off the needle, making sure that that new loop still stays on the needle. Pull that needle out, return the result to the right hand needle, tighten it up. So this is the last one on the left needle. I've got just 1 stitch left, and now I'm going to work the last one off of the right hand needle. But I'm not going to return it to this needle. I'm going to keep both of them here. So I have finished that bind off. I've got the 2 chains right here. It's very flat. It's very comfortable under the heel. This does not create an issue at all. So now, this is the purl side. We're going to turn back so that the heel is facing. So there is the heel. It very much looks like it was grafted. There's one of the rows looks twisted at the base. That's the one where that you're working off the left-hand needle through the back. That causes those stitches to twist. You could work them as a left leaning decrease, like an untwisted one, like an SSK if you wanted to, but it's the underneath the foot, so it really doesn't matter. So you've got 2 stitches left here, and the number of rows that we worked along the side, it would have been 18. We worked 12 stockinette rows, and we worked 5 decrease rows because there were 3 decrease rows, 2 purl rows, and then we had half of a purl row before we joined the heel. So this side of the heel flap has 18 selvage stitches. The other side has 17. And what we need to do is pick up 12. So we're going to be picking up 12 stitches along this side, 12 along that side, and then we'll have these 2, so that will bring us back to the 26 that we started with when we had the heel. So the reason that we did not slip the selvage stitches is because we need to pick up 2 stitches for every 3 rows. If we had slipped the stitches, we would only have 9 selvage stitches, and we'd have to make up the difference instead. And that was what I did on my first sock because I didn't understand what was actually going on. And by making up those extra stitches, I tried a bunch of different ways, but it ends up kind of gappy. So it didn't work out very well to do that. So on the second sock, I realized that the selvage stitches were not slipped, and instead they were picked up. And then on the following round, they're worked so that they are twisted. So we're going to go right through the center of those selvage stitches. We're not going under like you normally do. You can see the 2 legs of the stitch. We're going to go right through the center of that stitch in order to pick one up. And then the next one has got kind of that bump. You see that little knot at the edge. We're going to go through the center, pick it up. Then we're going to skip the next one, and so now we have to go through another one with a bump. And one that is smooth. We skip the bump. Then we do one that is smooth. And we do one with a bump. So these are the 2 that we had after we finished joining the heel. So far I've got 6 stitches. I need to get 6 more. Okay, so I have 12 stitches. I have not been picking up in the corners at all like I would normally do on a regular sock. Dagrun didn't do it, so I didn't do it just to see what would happen, and it seems to have come out okay. There really aren't holes in the corners. So now I have to work across the instep stitches, and I'm going to work those as ribbed stitches exactly as they present. This second side of the flap doesn't have 18 stitches, it has 17 stitches, because remember when we went to join at the heel, we purled across half the row. And if you use that traditional method that Dagrun did, where she started the heel at the center back and forth, you're actually only going to have 16 stitches on this side. So you're going to have to pick up at a rate that's greater than 2 out of 3. Probably more like 3 out of 4. So you would pick up, if you did 3 out of 4, you'd get 12 stitches out of 16. So you could do, if you have 17 here, you could do 3 out of 4, 3 out of 4, you know, 3 out of 4, 2 out of 3, something like that. So you can vary it, but you do need to pick up the same number of stitches along this edge. So I have 12 here. I picked up 12 over here, and I have those two. For this round, again, these are the two that we ended up with after we joined. So I'm just going to work those as regular knit stitches. And then for the rest of for these 12 right here that I picked up, I'm going to work them through the back. You don't have to if you don't want to. It might make they might be a little gappy if you don't. But it also might provide a little more stretch along this edge. This edge does tend to feel a little less stretchy when you're wearing the sock. So if you're concerned about that, it might help. I can't guarantee that, to work them as regular stitches rather than through the back. Once again, you're going to work the instep as the stitches present. If you used DAGRUN'S method, the way the stitches are situated right here are probably going to be a little bit different. You might have a purl at one end, a single purl at one end, and a single knit at the other. If you do have a single purl at one end, I would work the stitch that's adjacent to it over here. I would work that, or it might be at the other end. I don't know which. You could, create it so that you actually have your ribbed pattern so that you have the two purls. So now I'm working this second side of the flap for the first time since I picked them up. So again, I'm going to be knitting those through the back until I get back down to the center of the heel. All right, and so from now on, I'm going to work the sole stitches as knits, and the instep stitches, I'm going to continue to working them in ribbing until it's time to start the toe. So I'm a fair way along the foot, and I'm keeping track of my rows. I'm matching the first sock that I knit, which had 47 rows from the pickup to the point where I was starting the decreases. So I keep these markers as marks every 10 rounds that I work. Because my beginning of round is here at the side, and I worked the heel across that first 26 stitches of the round. Once I get going again in the round for the foot, this is the beginning of the round. The beginning of the sole is the beginning of the round for me. If you are working your sock so that you are keeping the beginning of the round at the middle of the back, then the middle of the sole is where the beginning of the round is. In order to count the rows, you're going to look for this twisted stitch. That's going to be row number 1, because that's going to come off the needle after the round where you've picked up stitches. So that'll be number 1, and then you'll go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, on up from there. The original pair of socks was worked for 36 rounds before beginning the toe decreases. And that would have made the total length from the end of the heel to this point to be 7 inches, allowing the toe decreases to be 2 3/4 inches, and then the entire length of the foot would be 9 3/4 length. So that's really the length of a medium-sized woman's foot. So that was the length I knit this first pair. But this pair is for my brother, who has very long feet. So I'm going to be knitting this for another 1.5 inches or so. So if I put this sock on, what you can see is the straight part of the heel flap goes to here, and then the curved part where the decreases are come around. So when I measure the foot of the sock, it is including some of that portion that has been decreased. And then I measured up to here, and it is just about 7 inches right here. So now it's time to begin the toe decreases. And my beginning of the round is at the beginning of the sole. If you are working in the traditional method, you will be here in the middle of the sole, ready to begin your toe decreases. It really doesn't matter which it is. And the way that these toe decreases are worked is that there are 8 decreases in every decrease round. They are evenly spaced, pretty much like you would work the crown of a hat. And so because there are 8 of them, we're going to be working, and we have 48 stitches, we're going to be working 4 knit stitches in a row, and then we're going to work a knit 2 together. And so we're going to repeat that all the way around. Knit 4, knit 2 together. I'm now going to work 6 plain rounds, and then I will do the next decrease round, and then I'll work 5 plain rounds, then the next decrease round, 3 plain rounds, the next decrease round, 1 plain round, and then I will work the final decrease round. This is a version of what's called the round toe, and that's just describes this type of scenario where you have multiple decreases per round, and that they're evenly distributed. And then you have some number of plain rounds in between. In some cases, like this one, you have more plain rounds at the beginning and gradually you work fewer and fewer. In other cases, there are round toes where you work the same number of plain rounds after each decrease round. Typically something like 2 plain rounds. I will leave links up at the top and also down below to this type of round toe, and then which also explains how you can modify this type of toe if you need a specific length. So in my case, I needed to modify this toe with my first pair of socks because my row gauge was not the same. I have fewer rows per inch, and therefore I needed fewer rounds in order to have a toe that was the same length. The alternative would have been to work the toe as it was written, but start it sooner to allow for the additional length that the full 20 rows would have made it. The method that I typically use to fasten off live stitches into a drawstring situation is to cut the yarn, leaving a nice long tail. I run the yarn tail through all of the stitches. So I go in the same order that I went as I worked in the round, but then I go around it a second time. So at this point, the tail is threaded through all of the stitches. And before I cinch it up tight, I'm going to run the tail through a second time. So I just follow the path that yarn tail went the first time as I go through each of these stitches. So then before I'm running this through, I take the opportunity to do the cinching up before I run it through completely. If I run it through completely twice, pull the tail out, and then try to cinch it, a lot of times I can't get it completely shut. Running the tail through all of the stitches twice and cinching it up tends to lock those stitches really well. And then I insert the yarn needle through the center point right there. And then I can weave in the tail on the inside. So an alternative method is to run the yarn needle through all of the stitches one time, cinch it up. I'm going to go down through the center, and then I'm going to come up through the center of the stitch that's across from the one that I came out through last. So I'm going to go across, and then I'm going to go down inside. By running that tail across the hole through an actual stitch and then down into the hole, that's another way to kind of lock the stitches in, and that's what Dagrun did in her socks. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.